You know, during my 2022 election, I was actually threatened by a guy who had basically said that he was going to have me shot at close range proximity. That's not my only experience with firearms. When I was in high school, I was actually at a campus where there was a gang shooting. And so obviously I take firearm safety very seriously, but I also take my personal safety seriously. And I just want to clarify something. To tell members, especially members that have been threatened, female members, I don't know if you guys know this, but are likely more targeted than male members because of the fact that we're looked at as victims, right? But to tell us that we don't have the ability to defend ourselves because of, for whatever happened on January 6th is wrong. I reserve that right to defend myself. I reserve the right to carry my firearm in whatever capacity I want to without your permission. And to bring that to this discussion when this is something that has nothing to do with natural resources is wrong. And so I know that you brought up your military training. Well, I'm also a veteran, and I believe that people have the right to defend themselves and that you don't have the authority to sit there and lecture our chairman on whatever policy that you have in perspective for whatever reason. Representative Boebert brought up a great point. Anyone that has a concealed carry in this area has to go through training as well. And so please remove that. It's a very obviously sensitive topic for those of us that have actually been threatened and seen violence. And for you to sit there and use your military service, I don't know why you would ever do that. And I do not yield my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Gentlelady, yield back. Does anybody else wish to be recognized?
You wish to be recognized.
Mr. Case, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, from the gentleman from Hawaii. There seems to be some confusion here. I'm not lecturing the chairman. I'm asking the chairman for some clarification. And number two, it's my understanding you don't need to have a CCW in order for you to bring a weapon onto the campus. As a matter of fact, much like some states, my state is a non-CCW state, you could just bring a weapon wherever you want. So, number one, assuming that everyone has proper weapons training, that's not a good assumption, right? So what I'm saying is that I believe you have a right to defend yourself. I think everyone has a right to defend themselves. But you also have the dual responsibility, and you know as a gun owner, to also use your weapon and store it and handle it in a safe manner. Now, since we don't have any clarification about who's going to actually enforce it, whether there's any enforcement capability, what I'm questioning is whether or not we should just have sane, previously established weapons handling regulations that have been endorsed and enforced, not endorsed, by places like the NRA and other weapons organizations that have trained many of us. That's all the question is. Now, the chairman can't answer the question. I get that because it puts him in a very sticky situation. But again, my thesis on all of this is that if we're going to allow this to happen—
The gentleman's time has expired.
Oh, no, it was— Oh, you didn't admit it. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just to finish— Oh, to Mr. Huffman. Is that okay? Yeah. I yield back.
Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
Recognizing Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
New at this. I just want to thank the chairman and all of the witnesses for participating. I know it's been a long day, so I'll try to keep this short. COVID improper payments continue to be an area of concern that in the federal government due to lack of oversight from the Biden administration. As Representative Boebert had stated, estimates range as high as $560 billion of government COVID spending was subject to fraud, waste, and abuse. That's our hard-earned taxpayer dollars that could have been used to feed families, heat homes, and fill up the pump during the Biden-caused inflation crisis. President Biden continued to approve COVID spending with no guardrails in place to make sure that the money was going where it was intended to go. We have seen the federal government spending and distributing to illegal immigrants. These same illegal immigrants, mind you, that did not take or pass the health screening process for legal immigrants to come here. And in addition to that, they did not pay into our taxpayer system. I would like to submit the graphic into record. We can see that the city of Chicago is sending $71 million for financial assistance for underserved communities such as undocumented residents. The state of Washington is handing out $340 million in grant payments for immigrants or illegal immigrants who are not otherwise eligible for federal stimulus. And the city of Boston is sending $1 million in direct cash transfers to illegal immigrants who are unable to receive federal COVID benefits. This rewards a dangerous process, incentivizing people to come here illegally, where some have estimated that a shocking 60% of Latin American children who cross the border, largely because they are seeking the American dream and understand some of the benefits people offer in this country, are caught by cartels, exploited for child pornography and drug trafficking. These are not cherry-picked fact or distorted figures. This is actually happening. My question is for Mr. Horowitz. If illegal immigrants are prohibited from federal public benefits, then why are they allowed to receive federal COVID dollars from programs like the American Rescue Plan?
I would have to go back and look at each program and what was how eligibility determinations were made and who was eligible. And I'm happy to follow up with you and provide information to you. We're looking at anybody who's ineligible. Frankly, we don't break it down between the categories as to why. So we're looking for people who are ineligible. We're working with our law enforcement partners on that. Whether you're here legally, not here legally, you really own the business, or you never owned a business, we're going to follow up and pursue that.
Before I yield back my time real quick, I just want to put out there that obviously being a part of oversight, we want to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are being safeguarded, right? But also, too, that government funds are not being used to largely incentivize and hurt people in the process. And so just to finalize, and maybe just your personal opinion, do you believe that because of this type of inappropriate spending, that it is putting people in harm's way that would potentially not be subject to this victimization?
So, as I said earlier, I don't think we've heard testimony that these programs weren't helpful to individuals. In fact, for many of them, like the PPP program, we've heard from small businesses that it saved them. For restaurants and the restaurant revitalization program, for unemployment insurance, we heard testimony about how it kept people afloat during this period. So we haven't heard testimony that the programs were a waste and useless. What we heard was there was a lack of preparation to issue the benefits. It resulted in fraud, a lot of identity fraud, and what we have heard is from how it victimized not just the public who lost the benefit of these programs to wrongdoers, it harmed the person whose identity was stolen. That individual has to deal with that, and it often harmed the individual who's intended to benefit, because they often struggle to get the benefits because the fraudster got there first.
Thank you.
And programs thought they were the fraudster.
Thank you. And before I leave, Chairman, would you please submit the record for the graphic for record? Thank you.
Without objection. And thank you for your questions. Just a note, they just called floor votes. We're going to get 2 more questioners in, then we'll recess and reconvene 10 minutes after votes. There are only 2 votes, and we move a lot quicker than Pelosi did. So the recess won't take long. But now the chair recognizes Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair.
Lady yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to correct the record. It was Obama-Biden who built the cages, a.k.a. chain-link partitions used by Border Patrol stations as a safety measure to guard against things like sexual assault. I know that we had heard earlier that Trump built cages. That is simply not true. And it is also, as seen behind me, Biden who put kids in shipping containers, something that the media wanted to fact-check. But as you can see, these are shipping containers. Now, it is no secret that there is a crisis at our southern border. Obviously, Mayorkas was actually caught on a hot mic a couple of years ago saying that these numbers were unsustainable. We have approximately 325,000 children enter the U.S. under Biden administration, and these are unaccompanied minors a majority of the time, and it's vastly between these ports of entries. Now, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for unanimous consent to enter these 2 graphics into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The Biden administration does not want to acknowledge these facts, and they certainly don't want to know who's coming into our country. It has been estimated that a shocking 60% of Latin American children who cross the border are caught by cartels and exploited for child pornography and drug trafficking, which would be roughly about 200,000 kids under this administration. As Representative Andy Biggs had stated, because of a letter that he received, 42,577 children have been lost. Just before I go into my next point, Chief Chavez, can you tell me the youngest age of a known rape victim that you've come across? or that you've heard of?
I don't have the age, ma'am. I know that when we go to the Central Processing Center, and this was in El Paso, my intelligence agents, as well as Homeland Security investigations agents, they do the debriefs at the center.
Do you have minors that are raped when crossing the border? Has it been an occurrence that has happened to either Chief Chavez or Chief Modlin? Yes or no, please? Sorry, we're limited on time.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, on my end.
Thank you. President Trump has expanded President Trump did expand biometrics collection to include DNA testing pilot program and fingerprinted children under the age of 14 to crack down on child smuggling and migrants posing as fake families. Now, I hear a lot of rhetoric saying that it was wrong for people to separate children, but I, as a Hispanic woman and a veteran, think that it is the right thing to do to separate children until you can biologically confirm that they are not being handed over into the hands of traffickers, and it is grossly irresponsible to hand those children that we might not have any idea if they're actually biologically related. Chief Modlin, would you agree that you would rather have a child to be confirmed to be a known family member than release them into the hands of a trafficker?
Thanks, ma'am. So I would agree. Anything that helps us determine the actual familial bond is positive.
Okay, so with my follow-up question on this one, are children currently having their biometric data being collected under this administration?
It depends on the age of the children, but 14 and above, they are, as I testified to earlier in Tucson sector, the vast majority are 17-year-old Guatemalan males. It's fairly rare to see young unaccompanied females in Tucson.
Are you able to collect at every sector in every section of the border?
I can't speak for the other sectors, ma'am, but
We do the same in RGV.
Okay. I would just like to also ask one more thing. A large part of your job is engaging in catching those that are engaging in human smuggling and trafficking. Do you believe that with more funding that you could do your job better?
ma'am, I absolutely believe more funding, we can do our own job, we can do our job better, absolutely.
Ma'am?
I agree the same, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to close out with this because I know that we're limited on time here. For any member of this House of Representatives advocating to defund Border Patrol and ICE, not only are you complicit in engaging in aiding and abetting traffickers, but you are hurting minority children at that. And with my final question, can you please tell me, are a majority of Border Patrol agents white or Hispanic?
Ma'am, my understanding is the majority of Border Patrol agents are Hispanic. And as I've stated earlier, most of them are either first-generation migrants or migrants themselves.
I will close with this. Clearly, we don't have a white supremacy issue in this country. Clearly, it's an illegal immigration one. I thank you guys for your service, and please tell your counterparts, God bless them. Thank you. Chairman, I yield my time.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Roth? Mr. Roth, have you communicated with government officials ever on a platform called JIRA? Yes or no? Real quick answer. We're on the clock.
Not
yes
to
or
the
no?
best of my recollection.
Not to
no.
your recollection? Great. If you did, in the event, communicate, who would have had access to this platform?
That's the nature of my confusion.
Okay.
JIRA
Did you ever speak to government officials on JIRA regarding taking down social media posts?
Again, not to the best of my recollection.
Can you explain to me why the federal government would ever have interest in communicating through JIRA, mind you, a private cloud server, with social media companies without oversight to censor American voices? I want to let you know that this is a violation of the First Amendment, and the federal government is colluding with social media companies to censor Americans. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit these graphics into record. And Mr. Roth, I'm going to refresh your memory for you. This flowchart behind me.
Ordered.
Thank you, Chair. This flowchart shows the following federal agencies, social media companies, Twitter, leftist nonprofits, and organizations communicating regarding their version of misinformation using JIRA, a private cloud server. On this chart, I want to annotate that the Department of Homeland Security, which has the following branches: Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, also known as CISA, Countering Foreign Intelligence Task Force, now known as the Misinfo, Disinfo, and Malinformation, MDM. This was, again, used against the American people. The Election Partnership Institute, or Election Integrity Partnership, EIP, which includes the following: Stanford Internet Observatory, University of Washington Center for Informed Public, Graphica, and Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and potentially, according to what we found on the final report by EIP, the DNC. The Center for Internet Security, CIS, a nonprofit funded by DHS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, also known as NASS, and the National Association of State Election Directors, NASED, and in this case, because there are other social media companies involved, Twitter. What do all of these groups, though, have in common? And I'm going to, again, refresh your memory. They were all communicating on a private cloud server known as Jira. Now, the screenshot behind me, which is an example of one of thousands, shows on November 3rd, 2020, that you, Mr. Roth, a Twitter employee, were exchanging communications on Jira, a private cloud server, with CISA, NASS, NASED, and Alex Stamos, who now works at Stanford and is a former security officer at Facebook, to remove a posting. Do you now remember communicating on a private cloud server to remove a posting? Yes or no?
I wouldn't agree with the characterization.
I don't care if you agree. This is your stuff. Yes or no, did you communicate with a private entity, the government agency, on a private cloud server, yes or no?
The question was if I
yes or no. Yeah, I'm on time. Yes or no?
Ma'am, I don't believe I can give you a yes or no.
Well, I'm going to tell you right now that you did, and we have proof of it. This, ladies and gentlemen, is joint action between the federal government and a private company to censor and violate the First Amendment. This is also known, and I'm so glad that there's many attorneys on this panel, joint state actors. It's highly illegal. You are all engaged in this action, and I want you to know that you will be all held accountable. Ms. Gaddy, are you still on CISA's Cybersecurity Advisory Council? Yes or no?
Yes, I am.
Okay. For those who have said that this is a pointless hearing, and I just want to let you guys all know, we found that Twitter was indeed communicating with the federal government to censor Americans. I'd like to remind you that this was all in place before January 6th. So to say that these mechanisms weren't in place and to make it about January 6th, I want to let you know that you guys were actually in control of all of the content, and clearly we have proof of that. Now, if you don't think that this is important to your constituents and the American people from those saying that this was a pointless hearing, I suggest you find other jobs. Chairman, I yield my time.
Chair recognizes Mrs. Luna.
I actually wanted to see if Mr. Epstein wanted to use some of my time to address some of the lies that Ms. Stanbury told about you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's great. So, there's an argument that I don't have the exact transcript, but the basic idea is that I'm bought in.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to raise a point of order, please.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady will state a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to inquire about the chair's read on the rules for this committee pursuant to what we adopted in terms of name calling and
Can I take back some of my time right now, because I'm interested in the facts.
We're going to
okay.
freeze
I just want to hear the facts from you.
No, okay, hold on one second. There's a point of order.
Yep.
And Ms. Luna, your time is frozen.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask that the words be taken down by the gentlelady from Florida regarding her name calling of me and the assertion that somehow the factual exchange that I had between myself and the witness were somehow other than a normal asking of questions to a witness.
All right, just give me 1 second. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I want to do is real quickly read our rules of witness decorum. And I would remind them that this is a violation of the rules of the House of Representatives to engage in personalities regarding the president or make statements that are personally offensive to him, that the rules govern members in debate and also applies to us as witnesses deliver their testimony. And so what I would ask is if Ms. Luna could perhaps rephrase to say maybe some untruths that were spoken. I think that would be fair and part of decorum, because we're going to disagree all day long on certain topics as the two parties, and sometimes we do agree, and then many times we don't. And so perhaps just rephrasing the question would satisfy everyone. And Ms. Luna, you're recognized for your full 5 minutes.
Mr. Epstein, would you please correct some of the mistruths spoken about you? I would like to hear your perspective on what is factually accurate.
Sure. So there are two things that Representative Stansbury brought up. So one I think I addressed very clearly this idea of any kind of racism, and she attributed this as almost an exact quote, me talking about the racial superiority of Western culture, and I clarified probably 5 times that Western culture has nothing to do with race, and it's about ideas, particularly individualism, freedom, and reason. So it didn't seem very honest to me to portray me as saying racial superiority. It seemed like another attempt to discredit me. And I think there's an inability to actually refute any of my arguments. And I think the same thing is true with the attack that I'm somehow representing and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. First of all, if I were, which I'm not, we need representatives of the fossil fuel industry here because they have expertise on this issue, which is about oil. So that's one thing, but it's just factually false. So I came to all of my ideas independently, and I said, once I came to the conclusion that fossil fuels are good, of course I proudly tried to advise fossil fuel companies, including coal companies, how to tell their story better. But to use my expertise and my convictions and to claim that I am dishonest and should not be listened to when I made a compelling case, I didn't think that was appropriate.
Mr. Epstein, I just wanted to ask you real quick, is China somehow protected by an invisible shield that prevents their carbon emissions from escaping?
No.
Okay, so if we have the ability to produce clean energy here or at lower carbon emissions versus China, don't you think that that would be better for the climate?
Yes, but I think the main thing is the world needs far more energy, and if you care about emissions, you need to find truly cost-competitive ways to do that. And the best way to do that is through freedom, through liberating nuclear, through liberating natural gas. And unfortunately, this administration is focused on limiting the freedom of certain industries, namely fossil fuels, including natural gas, and then imposing extremely expensive things that the market won't choose on its own, which is the whole IRA, which is just a total subsidy fest that does nothing to make alternatives truly cost competitive.
I agree with you. I think from a perspective on also national security, to say that somehow the United States is going to go to completely electrical grid would actually pose a massive threat to us.
Yes.
Because if you have a hacker, they could shut down an entire first world country, and obviously that's something that we don't want. My final question for you is, first of all, thank you for coming to testify before Congress.
Pleasure.
I appreciate you being here. But with everything that we just heard, I mean, what is the best way that we as a country can really prevent China from essentially owning us? Because as you had stated earlier, the Paris Climate Accord, I mean, us even engaging in that is hindering us while they're polluting and destroying our planet. And I hear a lot about climate change, but of few people of action that are willing to actually address that.
Could I just comment on the grid, which you also mentioned?
Yes, of course.
Because you mentioned the security threat of the grid and it's vulnerable to these kinds of attacks. I think the number one thing that it's vulnerable to is we are catastrophically reducing the supply of reliable electricity and then catastrophically increasing the demand for reliable electricity. And so California, where I live, is a perfect example. We've attacked fossil fuels, we've attacked nuclear, so we have less reliable electricity, and then we're trying to mandate electric everything. And this is why, as I mentioned, Newsom had this announcement, no more internal combustion engine vehicles, and then 5 days later he had to say, don't charge your EV. And we have signs all over the place saying, don't use your electricity. We only have 3% penetration of EVs. So we're talking about this catastrophic, unthinking increase of EVs. And we are actually threatened, I have this documented, we're threatened to lose 20% of our reliable electricity in the next 7 years under the Biden EPA. So that is a catastrophic threat. I can also answer about China,
yes, please,
if you'd like. So, I mean, I think with China is China actually cares about energy, and they are doing what is good for their people and also the power lust of the government in terms of energy. So they, for example, use 5 times as much industrial electricity as we do, overwhelmingly coal. And the only way for us to be secure and outcompete them is to have a very aggressive energy freedom policy. And that includes, one is liberating domestic development from things like NEPA, which unfortunately this administration has done nothing to do, and in fact reversed the good Trump administration things on NEPA. We need to end preferences for unreliable electricity and actually have all forms of electricity compete so we can actually have a stable grid. We need to reform the EPA so it stops shutting down reliable power plants. We need to what I call decriminalize nuclear, not just subsidize it and this kind of thing. And in general, we need an emissions policy of long-term reductions, not catastrophic emergency reductions, through liberating American innovation, not punishing America. And what the IRA does is it punishes America and accomplishes nothing globally because, as you said, Chinese emissions influence the global emissions picture just as much as American emissions do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Obviously, that was very factual, and I think you're very well qualified to be here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. OPM recently hired a senior leader who was found to have previous sexual harassment on 2 individuals in his role as Executive Director of Louisiana Housing Corps. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit 2 of these articles for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay. You know, I hate having to really bring this up because I feel like this should have been handled somewhat how we do it in the military at the lowest level. But unfortunately, because of the fact that some of the policies in place at your organization seem to have failed some of the employees, these people were placed in position of power, which ultimately ended up allowing them to victimize people. So this article and the ones that I submitted actually come after a second Washington Post article released in January 2023 highlighted how a former high-ranking DoD official was hired by OPM in 2021 to serve as the chief financial officer while under investigation by the DoD's Office of the IG for misconduct as well. We should all be concerned about these instances, of which significantly hinder OPM's ability to establish and maintain a trusted workforce as outlined in their vetting guidelines, which is why I would like the chairman to submit these for record, of which he has. And I guess this leads me to my next question for you, ma'am. I'm sure you're aware of the recent situation in which an individual who has previously been investigated for sexual harassment on 2 subordinates was actually hired for a role with OPM's Retirement Services Division. We are also aware that on February 10th of last year, you signed onto a document which outlined the vetting procedures to establish and maintain a trusted workforce. Were these procedures used when hiring this individual in line with guidance that you issued on February 10th, 2022?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I'd like to say at the outset that I do take these issues and these matters very seriously. I am committed to a workplace that's free from harassment, and we do find these reports alarming, and we are conducting a careful review right now. And because of that, I'm limited in going into the details of these particular matters. What I can tell you is that these were 2 distinct matters that we don't think has indicates any particular flaw in the vetting procedures that we've been administering at a government-wide level.
Just on average, how long do these reports take to close out, though? Because when people, especially in positions of power, whether or not they're placed on leave, there's a certain aspect of, I think, something that you guys owe the victims, because once something like that happens, you're forever changed. How long does it take for these people to get fired? Because in my opinion, if I found this in my office, and I'm sure if you had a subordinate that was making sexual comments to you or racial comments to you, you'd probably fire that individual immediately. But unfortunately, sometimes these people, it seems like they get a slap on the wrist, they're dismissed, and then that's it.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Like I mentioned, these allegations are alarming, and I'm frustrated as well. To have to manage this situation, but I do want to emphasize that as a part of my role as an OPM director, I have to ensure that there is a fair and thorough process in place as a part of this review, and to let that take its course. And so it is absolutely frustrating, and I acknowledge that, but that is what I'm required to do in the responsibility of this role.
Are you aware that a senior former Pentagon official now serving as the executive leadership at OPM was subject of a report finding that he had repeatedly sexually harassed women and used racial slurs during his tenure at the Pentagon, and you guys hired him?
Congresswoman, like I mentioned, I'm I'm aware of the allegations, and that's why we're conducting.
I want to specify real quick, though, these were not allegations. This person was found to be doing this, and he was hired. The reason I mentioned that, though, is that to me, is not a qualification of someone that we need to be giving a government job to that is potentially in a very senior position that can exploit that position of power.
Well, Congresswoman, let me just say that when these individuals were hired, I was not aware of the circumstances.
Do I have your word that you'll be looking into it and seeing that these people will be handled accordingly?
Absolutely, absolutely.
My final question is how will OPM ensure that other federal agencies do not onboard individuals to be known to have either engaged in sexual harassment or racial comments?
Congressman, just to confirm, you're asking about how we would ensure that across government or
just
in
in your practices for hiring people?
Well, we continue to do, not just in this particular circumstance, but of course the learnings and what we will find here, we will make adjustments and changes, but we are continuously reviewing our hiring processes and our vetting processes to determine where changes need to be made. And this particular matter and review will inform that. We have a multi-layered, multifaceted process in place when it comes to hiring senior officials. And we also have a commitment, like I mentioned, to a workplace free from harassment. And we're committed, as I've mentioned, we have a government-wide role around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And we have the same within our organization. We have a DEIA council. We have high scores when it comes to the DEIA FEVS index for the work that we're doing in this area. So you have my commitment to address these issues. And this is a work also of within the agency, again, how we are conducting a thorough review and ensuring that we want to take what we learn from this and where there might be gaps or improvements that we make those changes.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. There's important conversation.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I just wanted to start out by saying that probably not just on this committee, but in the entire House of Representatives, I am the only member of Congress that has both survived an armed robbery, a home invasion, a gang shooting on my school campus, and I remember being a young girl and being brought to a cousin's funeral that had been murdered. She was shot. So when I hear people trying to turn this, which is a hearing on a stabilizing brace, into issues of gun violence and raising the topics and concerns of children and violence against children, I would like to remind people that in Washington, Chairman, if I could submit these to the record, in Washington,
so moved.
Thank you, we are allowing for late-term abortion, and these babies were born alive. And my colleagues are not acknowledging that. So I just want to put that in perspective, that I don't believe that this is about protecting children. I believe that this is a political argument from people that have not gone through experiences and are seeking to use this platform to write legislation that's unconstitutional. So my following questions are for Ms. Sawyer. Do you believe that firearms and women that have firearms is apparently anti-woman?
Yeah, so this has been something that's been raised several times in this hearing, this idea that guns don't protect women. Of course they do. And I personally take offense at having my natural right to self-defense mansplained to me by members of this body who come to work every day protected by armed men with guns, very much believing that those guns are keeping them safe. And I tend to agree with them that those guns are, in fact, a large component in keeping them safe. I would also point to the defensive gun use database that we run at Heritage. So many of those instances involve women who otherwise would have been at a physical and strength disadvantage, who were able to use essentially self-defense at a distance to take on and defend their rights in ways they otherwise would not have been able to.
Thank you. Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Bosco. Mr. Bosco, as I'm sure you may know, one of the leading causes of death in this country is obesity. Do you believe that we should place a ban on spoons?
I don't think spoons should be regulated, but if they are regulated, it should be Congress that does it and not the FDA.
Do you believe that somehow controlling someone's spoon access is going to prevent them from becoming obese?
I don't believe that will make any difference, no.
Well, I'm so glad you've clarified, because clearly in this instance, and oh, actually, I'd like to follow up with one more question. For veterans that are disabled, would this law turn those veterans who have served their country, regardless of party affiliation, into criminals?
So this law will place burdens on every American who owns them, and it won't allow people to own this product without following through the process. So will veterans not be able to use the product? They will have to register their firearms and go through a burdensome process of doing it.
If a veteran is unaware that this has passed, would that turn that veteran into a criminal?
Well, anyone who doesn't read where you can find all the regulations is not going to know about it, and they will be subject to a 10-year felony offense. So, and I don't know how many people read promulgation of regulation on their spare time. I know that a lot of us do here, but I can certainly tell you that there's a lot of gun owners in the United States that don't know anything about this.
What the ATF has done with this administration, with the weaponization of this agency to take something that is basically done to aid people that are disabled and then make this about protecting children from a majority of members who have never experienced gun violence and or seen the direct outcome of what happens when bad people obtain guns, of which you will never be able to regulate, is not only an abuse of, I think, authority, but it's unconstitutional. I thank you for being here today, and Chairman, I yield my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Ms. Luna.
I just want to correct for the record, as words matter, especially here in Washington, that I did not say I was the only person, but I am definitely the only person that has those listed experiences. So to take my words out of context, I'm not in the business of listening to if people are offended. I'm in the business into finding the facts, and the facts are is that I have one job, and that is to uphold and defend the Constitution, and for people to try to take that and then use this position, clearly that, again, I will reiterate that we are focusing on a brace, not gun violence, and the rest of these topics and rabbit holes, rabbit trails that they're going down. The point is that bad people will always obtain guns, and regulating the rights of law-abiding citizens to do other than that is not going to do anything but enable the bad guys.
Chair recognizes Representative Frost.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Luna.
To follow up on some questions asked by Mr. Edwards earlier, what is a DOE's process for to catch the taxpayer dollars that were going to Chinese affiliated companies? Like, do you have a oversight that looks into people before you award contracts? The reason I ask that is because obviously the CCP's been known for corporate espionage, and obviously with you guys, I'm sure that there needs to be probably a bigger set of oversight and security for that before you guys are awarding government contracts.
Yes, and again, thanks for this question. We know it's a big issue, a big concern to you and to us. So, we do due diligence on every applicant that we are thinking is in the zone of being meritorious for an award. So we do due diligence around ownership issues with countries of greatest concern. And we are doubling down on our capability to do that. So we've always done that in what we call a pre-selection phase. And by selection, I mean it's a meritorious project, and we would like to select and then actually enter into a deeper negotiation to get to the point where you actually award money. A lot of standard terms and conditions that companies need to agree to get a government award. And during that whole post-selection process, we do even more due diligence around these types of foreign concerns.
Are you guys doing anything currently to promote domestic energy production?
we're doing a lot to promote domestic energy production and utilization of domestic supply chains.
So one of the biggest issues that I'm currently seeing exist in Congress is a lot of people will talk about clean energy, but it's not really clean, especially when it's tied to China or Chinese productions, for example, windmill manufacturers, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is instead of facing a global climate crisis, we're facing a global China crisis. And I'm sure that you would agree, just kind of yes or no real quickly, do you agree that China is one of the biggest threats to our climate as a whole?
China is a big emitter of greenhouse gases.
And
correct.
those greenhouse gases do not stay contained in the China region, correct?
Right, greenhouse. It's
Okay.
a global pollutant.
Yes.
Right.
How about you, Honorable Donaldson?
That's a little out of the lane for an inspector general.
No, I mean, it's just your opinion. I'd like to know because you guys are obviously in important positions, and I want to see your view and perspective on that.
That's certainly what's reported.
Okay, so I think that if there's any way that you guys can help kind of tailor that and make sure that we're not doing anything to really enable these companies and corporations, I think that that would be the best thing. I guess my last question for you would be, we're currently seeing that China has a insanely big monopoly on critical minerals that we need to produce some of these things for electric vehicles. What would you say would be the best way that we here in the United States could handle that instead of outsourcing some of these operations to other countries like China, for example? Would it be domestic harvesting, production?
We are very interested in building out the critical mineral material supply chain in the United States to the extent that the United States will embrace this in different ways. You know, it's many parts of that sort of that landscape. In addition, I think we're very engaged with a number of international allies so that we can have strategic alliances where we can work together.
What allies are those, just so I know?
Like northern, like Canada, Australia. There's a list of countries that also have resources that we work with around opportunities for critical minerals and materials.
Do you know if anyone's tied to BRICS, any of the BRICS countries?
We can get back to you on that.
Okay. The reason I ask is because BRICS is currently working to undermine the U.S. dollar as a whole by forming an alliance, and they're tied with China. So I just want to make sure. Thank you very much, Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you, Chair. Now,
good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. And before I go into my questioning, I just wanted to correct some of the statements made by one of my colleagues from across the aisle. First of all, for those who are reporters here, the reason why some Republicans didn't support the PAC Act, and I say this as a veteran and the wife of a combat wounded veteran in Afghanistan, that when you are using veterans, especially with burn pits, and then you stick $400 billion in unnecessary spending so you can get your pet projects paid for, we are not going to support that, and we do not advise using veterans to get your pet projects paid for. So that's the first thing. Second thing, Mr. Garcia had annotated earlier that this is a very complicated issue. Obviously, the entire region of Afghanistan has been destabilized, and it is known as the graveyard of empire. So there's a big foreign policy issue that we have in this country, and I do believe that this administration is unqualified and intentionally doing the wrong thing because, in my opinion, they are trying to empower China, and I will go to the grave with that one. But to further why we are here today, I believe that the military as a whole is suffering from people that have been put in charge and do not truly understand the culture of the military, and thus they have implemented policy that is not enabling our warfighters to do their jobs. War is not fun. I would never advocate for it. But when you have people that are on the ground, specifically with what happened in Afghanistan, they need to be trusted to do the right thing, and therefore the red tape has to be cut. My question is for Mr. Sopko. You know, I heard a testimony from a previous committee that had a young Marine sniper that had said that he was not authorized to take the shot that could have prevented the suicide bomber from detonating that and thus saving the lives of the 13 killed, 170 civilians, and then the 45 wounded service members. Has anything been changed with the laws of armed conflict and or memorandums from the DoD to enable, whether it's team sergeants in special operations communities, whether it is people who are at the lowest level of leadership, to authorize those military officials to do their jobs?
I'm not able to answer that because I am not the DoD IG. I think you should ask Mr. Storch.
But after your, okay, Mr. Storch, would you be able to answer that question? Has anything been done in regards to the law of armed conflict or memorandum done to allow lower levels of leadership to include team sergeants of special operations communities and or the acting commanders in some of these units that go out to do their jobs, to make those decisions where they're not looking at necessarily, I guess from my opinion, getting in trouble for doing the right thing and protecting their guys?
So I'm honestly not aware of the answer to your question. I'd be happy to have my folks look into it and get back to you.
Okay.
I will say we have done work looking at the law of war and the need for updating of the policies. Whether that goes to your question, I don't honestly know the answer, but we'll check into it.
We need to empower our warfighters to do their jobs, and that means that we have to trust them to make those difficult decisions in those horrific times. The reason why I'm so impassioned about this topic is behind me you'll see a picture of Staff Sergeant Ryan Christian Knaus. He was actually one of the 13 that was killed in Afghanistan, and his mother lives in my district back home. And although I was not a member of Congress at the time, within 24 hours of finding out that he had been killed, I actually called his mom. And I had to make that phone call, and as a member now, I'm sure any representative who has had to do that, that is one of the hardest phone calls you will have to make, to hear the heartbreak in a parent's voice for losing a child. And when you sit here and you hear how this administration handled it, I don't know if you are aware of this, but President Biden, after seeing his mom at a memorial for this, his first statement to her name's Paula, was, I can understand if you're angry, but then declined to hug the actual mother, of which she responded, this could and should have never happened. What has this administration done to really help the families heal after the fact? Because the fact is that had that Marine Corps sniper been authorized to take that shot, this might not have happened the way that it did. There's a lot of obviously drops in regards to foreign policy, but I want to know, now that that is done, what is the administration doing to allow this family and these families to have closure? Any of you?
I could just say that's not something we've done any work on. I appreciate the question.
Are you guys in correspondence or actively talking to any of the family members in regards to your report?
The oversight that we've done wouldn't call on us to contact the family members, so I think the answer is no.
Would you be willing to if they reached out? Because I can tell you that my office spoke with about seven of those family members, and I think that they would like to get some answers.
So we're always happy to talk to people and to hear from them, and if there are issues to be addressed, we'll look into addressing them.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Chairman, I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Sopko, did the Afghanistan war start on January 21st, 2021?
No, 20 years before.
Yeah, it's the longest war in our history, isn't
Absolutely.
that right?
Yes.
And certainly in your evaluation of the last 9 or 10 years, 10 years of that war, was it your understanding that one decision impacts the next decision, which impacts the next decision, and so forth?
It depends on the decision, but yes. I mean, I think we highlight that there was 4 administrations made many mistakes over that 20 years.
Right. Now, Mr. Storch, are you aware of a November 11th, 2020 memorandum from President Trump relating to the withdrawal of troops from Somalia and Afghanistan?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that, I'm sorry.
Okay, I find that interesting because it was a memo that Donald Trump issued to all servicemen to withdraw all troops, every single troop from Afghanistan by January 15th, 2021. Does that familiar to you now?
Yes, it does, thank you.
Yeah. And do you know whether that was vetted by anyone at the Department of Defense?
So that is, and that may explain my initial question. That's not something that our office has done independent oversight on, so I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Why not? I mean, it's absolutely incredible that a president would issue an order to withdraw all troops from an ongoing war without consulting anyone at DOD, which is what both Secretary Austin and Chairman Milley have said.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really appreciate it because, one of the things that I think underlies the response to that question and just in general some of the issues we've discussed is, as inspectors general, our work looks at the execution of policies and strategies that are set by administrations, regardless of partisan affiliation, right? So with regard to who made which decision and how that was made, that's typically, those are matters for the management and for the administration and the leadership of the agencies to do. Once those policies are set, we look to see whether they're done effectively, efficiently, economically.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation.
Yes, sir.
The point I'm making here, and Mr. Sopko, you've been making this all day, and I think it's a very valid point, which is if we are to conduct meaningful oversight over the war in Afghanistan that lasted for 20 years, we can't just start on January 21st, 2021. Would you agree with that, Mr. Sopko?
No, you can't start with the Doha Agreement either.
Right.
I mean, we had years of problems which put the context of why the Taliban, why the Trump made a certain decision and the Biden administration made a certain decision.
Right. The 5,000 members of the Taliban who you just referenced to have been released and then not abided by their promises, in your investigation of the withdrawal, did you determine whether any of those 5,000 Taliban members were involved in the violence surrounding the evacuation?
I don't think we had that granularity on that. We just knew that the Afghans said that most of them, the Afghan soldiers and military, they said most of those Taliban went back to fight.
Mm-hmm. But it's certainly possible that some of those would have been there, right? They were fighting. Yeah. This war is very personal to me and my district. I represent Wall Street and 9/11, the World Trade Towers. And this is where the 9/11 Museum lives. This is where the principal attack that led to the Afghanistan war. And one of the things that I'm really struggling with is that we have what is clearly politicized oversight, trying to have a gotcha moment against President Biden. But my colleagues on the other side do not support additional support for our veterans. They did not support the PAC Act.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I have 20 seconds.
Will you? I can give you some of my time.
Can I just finish? I will not yield. Let me just finish. And if I could have a little bit more time, Mr. Chairman, you'll have plenty of time to respond, Ms. Luna. The point I'm trying to make here is that there are two significant pieces of legislation that would not only support our veterans by providing more health care, but would also support the many Afghans, the hundreds of thousands of Afghans who helped our troops during the 20 years of the wars. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not support these bills. So we can talk all we want about the evacuation, but let's see where we're going to be when we put our votes on the line and whether we're going to support our troops and whether we're going to support our foreign allies who helped us over a 20-year war. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Before Chair recognizes the next speaker, I feel we have to respond to the statement that this is a political hearing. Our four witnesses are inspectors general. And the main theme that I've heard thus far is that they're not getting cooperation from this Biden White House.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, what is the basis for you opining on this right now?
I was going to correct your misstatement.
It's not a misstatement. It's a assertion of me that you want to focus solely on what has happened since January 21st, 2021. And that's to score political points because meaningful oversight would go back for 20 years.
This is about fighting for the families that never got closure because they lost loved ones on failed military leadership. So stop making it about this. If you want to ask the questions,
I don't understand what basis she has to talk. You can make whatever.
Point of order.
Chair recognizes the ranking member for point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the chair's indulgence of real discussion among the members. I hope that we would be able to keep it balanced in some way. So if the gentleman could have the chance to respond to you, that would be wonderful, and then we could move on.
We'll move on. Point taken.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
From ensuring the Bureau of Ocean Management continues to follow the moratorium on Florida's offshore energy development to the Fish and Wildlife Service's protection of critical marine species and their habitats, the Department of Interior plays a substantial role in my district and throughout the state of Florida. Florida beaches are vital to the success of our coastal communities and the protection of our wildlife. In 2021 alone, Florida's visitors contributed $101.9 billion to the local economy and supported nearly 1.7 million jobs. The moratorium on offshore energy development projects and Florida's beaches and wildlife from disasters like the 2010 BP oil spill and protects our national security interests as well as protecting our military readiness and training activities at Eglins test ranges and complexes throughout the Jacksonville Range complex areas. Similarly, Florida's beaches are home to some of our most beloved marine wildlife, some of which are protected under the Endangered Species Act, but unfortunately, the erosion of Florida beaches puts many wildlife that are listed under the ESA at risk, making it necessary for routine coastal maintenance. For example, the Sand Key project in my district is up for renourishment, and the erosions of beaches like Sand Key can be devastating because it leaves infrastructure prone to flood damaging, which negatively impacts the local economy and also demolishes many habitats that endangered species and threatened wildlife rely on. In fact, the Sand Key project has directly impacted species like the loggerhead turtles, piping plover shorebirds, western Indian manatees, eastern backed rails, red knots, wood storks, and American crocodiles, all of which are federally classified as endangered or threatened species and reside in or around the Sand Key region. So with that being said, my question is for you, Secretary Haaland. The erosion of shorelines affecting natural resources, energy defense, public infrastructure, and tourism. How has the Department of Interior and Bureau of Ocean Management worked to address the erosion along our nation's coastal beaches, barrier islands, and wetlands?
Congresswoman, thank you. And first, I want to thank you for your care and concern about the marine life in your district and beyond Florida. I went to Florida and had a chance to be in the Everglades, and it really is a magical place. I can't, honestly, I'd be happy to get back with your staff about any specific programs that we have for coastal erosion in your area. And certainly we're always happy to work with you on any ideas or projects that you would like to present to us. And we care deeply about these areas.
This next question is for anyone on the panel. How long does it typically take the Department of Interior or each bureau to provide the necessary permits for projects like Sand Key, where sand placement is critical to the restoration of endangered habitats?
As the Secretary said, we could provide statistics like that. I will say, as the former director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, marine minerals and coastal restoration is one of the primary missions of BOEM, working with our partners, including the Army Corps, on those types of projects.
If I can just ask you a real quick question. So the Army Corps is giving us pushback, and they're failing to acknowledge that this is actually a very endangered habitat. So we need help on it because they're giving us some bureaucratic, nonsensical answer. And obviously, I think you guys might have a little bit of pull there, so we'd appreciate your help.
Well, I will reach out to Mike Connor at the Army Corps, who used to have my job. So
I'm
I
about
know
to like,
he
do
appreciates
protests.
our
Like,
mission.
I'm not even kidding. Like, I am about to go to the office and protest because it's nonsense. Okay, so is the Department of Interior or Bureau of Ocean Energy Management committed to following the offshore energy development moratorium on the Eastern Gulf? So as you know from Florida, I would bet you probably can't find a Florida rep that's going to want anything off our shores. I don't care what it is.
Thank you, yes.
Okay, good. I like to hear it. Thank you, guys. Chairman, I yield my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to take this opportunity, like some of my colleagues have before me, to welcome our Madam Secretary and Deputy Secretary and Director Flanagan, who I had the pleasure.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida for 5 minutes. Beforehand, I want to publicly say congratulations on your great news.
Thank you. It's like the best kept secret in Washington. I'm expecting, so yeah, thank you, guys.
And I thought it was interesting. How many members of Congress have delivered a baby?
I'll be number 12, so it's 0.1%.
20 in the history of Congress.
12.
12. 12 female, 12 ladies have delivered babies while in Congress. I think that's a pretty interesting statistic. So congratulations, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to start out by saying I think investments made on behalf of the American people by assets managers should serve in the interest of the investor, not woke ideologies being pushed by corporate financial institutions and to entities like the SEC. Honorable Reyes, I actually really liked how you kind of unloaded with some facts, and so if I have time at the end of this, I want to yield to just kind of let you speak on what you think it's important for the American people to know. But if I could just real quickly ask you a few questions. What are the challenges faced by companies in dealing with increasing numbers of shareholder proposals, especially those related to ESG metrics?
Well, they're being forced to themselves choose a path that may not be yielding the best returns to their own investors. They may be forced to make choices that push their own customers away from their own products. I mean, there are a whole host of different problems that this type of pressure can have on a particular company. And then on the other side, there are a lot of problems, as we've already discussed extensively, with investors and the potential loss of capital investments. All of those things are problematic, Congresswoman.
How often are clients informed that their asset managers are prioritizing ESG metrics over their financial return?
No, their asset managers are required to disclose what they're investing in, but I don't think it's readily apparent to most people that their investments are necessarily being invested with an ESG bent, right? So again, transparency laws and requirements would behoove, I think, the whole process, and that's what we're here again to talk about. Not the policy, but the process, how this is being effectuated. Is it being done fairly and in a free market, or is it being done coercively?
I think it's very interesting that obviously there are many things that my colleagues across the aisle and I probably disagree on. Probably agree on some and mostly disagree on most. But I think it's very interesting that in this type of situation that you have people that sometimes blindly trust and really don't know that they might necessarily be investing in something that goes against what their moral principles are or whatever it might be. So
yeah, I don't think most of us even understand the power that we have to vote our shares. The vast majority of Americans are working hard and trying to raise families and not paying attention. So that's part of the problem, and they rely too heavily on proxy services or their asset manager to make those decisions for them. Again, let me make this point, Congresswoman. We've never disputed your own ability to invest whatever assets you have the way that you want to, including an ESG program. But when you're an asset manager investing on behalf of others, it's an entirely and wholly different circumstance, and you have to live up to that fiduciary duty.
So we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to yield the rest of my time to you. What is the most important takeaway for the American people to know from this hearing today?
Well, again, I'd like to point back to the three things that we talked about. One was the DOL rule, but we've already covered that, I think, sufficiently. The second, going back to why the SEC would not exclude a shareholder proposal that violates state laws, against anti-discrimination laws, and that's something that I hope that the committee will take up and have a hearing on. The SEC could have easily excluded that. They chose not to. And again, this is in the context of proxy groups. It was because of, my contention, the pressure of a proxy service that the shareholders garnered enough votes. They didn't win, but they came a razor's edge of prevailing, 47%, to literally put their own company in harm's way by violating a number of state laws. So that's one. The other is going back to FERC, and if this committee would look at organizations like NZAM and Climate Action 100, again, $68 trillion or $59 trillion AUM, and view them to see if they are a holding company, as we believe they should be construed under FERC. They're acquiring more than $10 million in other utilities. It's problematic because if they are a holding company, then they're violating a number of FERC regulations, including owning more than 20% of a particular utility. They own multiple utilities in excess of 20%. FERC requires asset managers to be passive, and these horizontal organizations are anything but passive. They are bluntly and very self-aggrandizingly clear about what their intent is, and that, we believe, also violates FERC's prohibitions on asset managers being not passive and trying to operate the utilities. So those are the areas, again, that I would like for the committee to be able to take up. Again, appreciate your time. Congratulations to you. I have 6 kids of my own, and this is the best news I heard all day.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on something Representative Donalds had pointed out and mentioned that the average median household income is roughly about $70,000 in 2021, which is a decrease from the year prior. Not to mention how devalued our current U.S. dollar is. So to talk about electric vehicles being cheaper for those that are less fortunate and live in rural communities, I think is an absolute a farce. But I did want to point out, being that we are oversight, we all know with what happened last week that the Biden administration, the Biden family, has a history and apparently transactions of really benefiting themselves and those that help them. I wanted to submit this to record, Chairman. It's a diagram that my team put together, and it has the slush fund of political donors and companies that help to elect Joe Biden and those that are receiving the very same green initiatives.
Without objection, so ordered.
Perfect. So just to kind of explain it here, and then I'll get to my questions. Starting in February of 2023, Biden's Department of Energy shelled out nearly $3 billion in loans to 2 electric battery companies, Redwood Materials and Ioner. The 2 companies are backed from funding from both Bill Gates and Powell, of which Bill Gates poured $127 million into a liberal dark money network to elect Democrats. And then in July of 2021, Redwood raised $700 million from a group of investors that included, again, both Gates and Powell, of which Powell gave jobs exclusively to leftist candidates and political groups that raised over $2 million. It goes forward to say that Ioneer won a $700 million loan from the Biden administration and saw its stock price increase by 33% after the announcement. And I'd just like to point out that the Biden administration did not invite Tesla to their EV event that they had at the White House. That's probably because Elon Musk is very based and doesn't have much to say about this administration or their impact on the environment. And then I'd like to go forward and say that John Arnold, who gave $13.5 million to one liberal dark money group from 2016 to 2020, also contributed in helping elect this administration. So to say that this administration is really working in the best interest of the green movement and protecting the environment, I think, according to the facts, is false. My questions, though, are for Mr. Bradbury. What should we do when we're told to evacuate ahead of hurricanes? I'm in the state of Florida. The electric grid is overloaded, and we're stuck in a standstill traffic for hours, and tens of thousands of people are pouring onto our freeways.
I guess you'd have to hitchhike with somebody who has an internal combustion engine car. I think that's why a lot of consumers are concerned right now, a little skeptical about whether an EV is the right choice for them. They're not sure whether they'll have convenient access to charging. And in California, we see some rationing and restrictions on the hours when people can charge. And I think that concerns a lot of people. There are a lot of question marks in exactly that area.
I did want to bring up was it Brandstetter? Did I say that correctly?
Baker Brandstetter.
Baker. I'll just Baker, if that's okay with you. So I'm a part of the House Democracy Coalition, and I just got back from a CODEL where we actually met with some of those countries that are now looking into doing lithium mining, right? But one of the countries that we met with specifically that you said, is going green was South Korea. And it was interesting for us because we did ask them, well, are you going to be embracing nuclear energy? Are you completely shutting out petroleum? And they said that it would be basically something that would be detrimental to their people if they were to completely just go from solely petroleum dependent to just electric and that they couldn't handle that. I just wanted to get your perspective on that, because South Korea is indeed one of, I think, the most incredible countries in the world. Indonesia said the exact same thing, as you, I'm sure, are tracking. They just received a contract from Ford for lithium mining, and I'm sure Tesla will be doing that as well over there, and they're also interested in receiving some of the credits from the IRA. But they also are depending on petroleum. And so given that that's a circumstance, although you're saying that we are moving towards a green initiative and it's supposed to be better for Americans, we're still outsourcing and doing it in countries that are embracing petroleum and nuclear energy. What are your thoughts? Sorry, I have 27 seconds left.
So the U.S. grid has a lot more diversity and resources than the South Korean grid, and so relying on homegrown domestic energy through the electric grid here is a much different scenario compared to South Korea. We do not import any products that use forced labor in the United States, and we should continue to do that.
I think that that's a little bit false, though, being that lithium and cobalt mines in the Congo are what we use to manufacture our goods, and we're still using those products. That's actually, I think, one of the biggest arguments that Representative Donald had. But, Chairman, I'm done with my time, so thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Stanbury from New Mexico.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna from Florida for 5 minutes.
Pretty appalling to hear some of these crime stats from some of my colleagues, but in reading some of your testimony, Mayor, and then also just hearing the back and forth, I realized that you have actually been more pro-law enforcement than your city council. And I think there's no clear, really example of that with what happened recently with the DC Council's decision to rewrite the city's criminal code, which, thank goodness, was overturned. But obviously what Americans want is effective leadership in their nation's capital, and that understanding the experience of residents and visitors is incredibly important, not just leaders that are apparently out of touch with issues plaguing the city. Mayor Bowser, I wanted to ask you why it is that you think your city council is working so hard against you to ensure the safety of residents and visitors.
I think our city council is concerned about safety of residents and visitors. It won't surprise anybody that we have philosophical differences. My views on how to make the city safer are well known, and I believe that they were affirmed by voters last year in bringing me back for a third term. But I also think that Americans are having these discussions in cities and towns all across our country. And what I hear them telling me when I go to visit places, they're not really concerned about my city council or me, but they do want to make sure that Washington is working. And when I say that, I'm talking about federal Washington.
I think, but my question is more so focusing right now in that I have constituents that come up, like some of my colleagues had mentioned, and they don't feel safe walking around. I didn't feel safe walking around. And when you had a fellow member of Congress that was brutally attacked by someone that had a criminal record that was obviously showing that this person was disturbed, and then you had the failure of prosecution for that. That, to me, does not signify a safe city. In fact, we're looking and we're seeing that sexual abuse offenses have increased over 48% in just 1 year's time frame from 2022 to 2023. My next question would be for you, Mr. Graves, just as a personal understanding. I understand you're married, yes?
I'm sorry, I missed a lot.
I understand that you're married?
Yes.
Okay, and you have children?
Yes.
So I would assume that you are against violence against women?
Yes, of course.
So my question for you is, there's been many concerns brought up by my colleagues that you have actively chosen to ignore certain cases, and as a result of that, it's impacting people that ultimately are relying on you to do your job in order to make them feel safe. In the instance of my colleague that was attacked, I mean, my goodness, she's coming downstairs from her apartment. You have a crazy man that goes in, has a criminal history, should have been locked up prior, and yet he wasn't. And I just want to know why, because I understand that if that was your wife or that was your child, I assume that you would have pressed charges. Would you have not?
So I understand the concern for the community and keeping all of our fellow community members safe. We are prosecuting the individual you're referencing.
But he had a track record, and he was allowed back on the streets, and those actions that were taken against him were clearly not done in a way that caused him to understand that he can no longer do that. This person was a disturbed individual. He should have been given a more harsher sentence. My question is would you have allowed that to happen if that was your wife or your child? Yes or no?
So
Is a yes or no?
So it's not a yes or no
It
question.
is a yes or no because you have people that are directly being impacted and hurt by these people, and you're failing to do your job. Just like Representative Bigg had asked you for your perspective on a case where someone was obviously being charged with a more harsher sentence than they deserved, and yet you're sitting here trying to argue that when people clearly don't feel safe. People are arguing about statehood. Statehood, fine, if a city can actually manage cases, but the city can't even prosecute adolescents' cases. And that is your responsibility. So I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but what I am asking is for you to do your job and make people feel safe, especially those that are depending on you to do it when you see cases of, 48% increase in sexual assault cases. My goodness.
So
That's it. I've heard enough. Chairman, I yield my time.
Congresswoman,
Thank you.
Congresswoman, may I address your question about sexual abuse? I know the chief wants to talk about it.
We only have 26 seconds left. But
We do have a lot to say about that, and when time allows.
I will contact your office.
Thank you.
Lady yields back.
Senator from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Goffman, thank you for coming in today. Just out of curiosity, have you ever owned a business? Have you ever owned a business?
I have not.
How long have you been in this position?
My current position?
Yes, or at the EPA?
2.5 years in this position.
Okay, and what did you do previously?
I worked at Harvard Law School.
What did you do there?
I was the executive director of a legal research program.
Okay, and you were there for how long?
3 years.
Okay. Have you ever been to Anchorage, Alaska?
No, I have not.
Have you ever evacuated a hurricane in Florida?
No, I have not.
Okay. And my final question, a little bit more personal, but how much do you make a year?
I
know it's kind of random, but I'm going somewhere with this.
About $175,000 a year.
Oh my gosh, you're doing better than I think we are after taxes, right, guys? Anyways, the reason I ask that is because right now what I'm seeing is the EPA, not necessarily you, but as a whole, people advising on legislation that's impacting Americans who might not be as fortunate as us, right? So right now, the average cost of an electric vehicle is around $66,000 a year. You have Black Americans' average income, $45K a year, and Hispanic Americans on average making about $58K a year. So when these policies go into place to force someone to buy a new vehicle, ultimately what ends up happening is many people can't afford that. Places like Anchorage, Alaska, I had the opportunity of being able to go out on a CODEL recently. And what I'm hearing from out there is that they do rely on gas-powered vehicles, especially because of the environment that they're in. And in an event like in Florida, when you've had to evac, we can't necessarily rely on electric vehicles because of the fact that, one, Florida's a very big state, and also, two, the fact that there's not enough charging stations, nor is there the infrastructure in place to, I think, provide the support needed for an entirely electric grid, not to mention that there's a national security issue that goes hand in hand with that because of the fact that if the electric grid is hacked, ultimately what ends up happening is it can shut down our entire country, and that's something that I'm sure that you would even agree is a bad thing, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So my question for you is, what is the EPA doing to actually talk to normal people, people not in Washington, people not at Harvard, people not in Congress, to ensure that they're being taken care of? Because these policies, this legislation, not only is it going to impact jobs, not only will it really attack the economy, but it's going to hurt Americans. So are you guys doing any outreach to actual normal people to see if they agree with any of this legislation?
Thank you for that question. Engaging with everybody, if you will, is an absolute priority whenever we undertake rulemakings like this. We talk to industry, we talk to our co-regulators in states, and we definitely arrange to meet with people in communities across the country on a number of our rules. And what we hear the most from the people we talk to is that reducing pollution in their communities is a top priority.
I mean, I think everyone wants a clean community, but the problem is that if you have people in poverty because of laws that aren't necessarily reflective of the areas that they live in, that's going to cause more issues long term than I think what we can do, not only to promote clean energy, which would be, in my opinion, nuclear energy, but then also to making sure that we're not sending our industries to places that don't respect the environment, and thus, regardless of what we do here, for example, in some of these Asian countries, they might be destroying the environment, so it doesn't matter what we do here. I have a question about Toyota Auto Corporation. It's estimated that about 1.2 million public chargers by 2030 is what is needed. That's about $400 per day. How many public chargers are going to be going online per day right now?
What I do know is that in the last couple of years, there was a 40% increase in chargers, which now bring us up to a total of 130,000 chargers.
Do you know how many per day are going up? Because right now, to hit those metrics, it would need to be about $400 per day.
I don't know how many are going up, but I do know that Congress passed 2 significant pieces of legislation that will boost the deployment of chargers.
Okay,
the private sector is making significant investments as well.
Okay, my final statement, because I'm short on time, is like, look, I know you're in a very important position, but I just hope that you're taking into account people that might not necessarily have the resources when you guys are making these decisions, because it's going to impact a lot of people and it's going to hurt Americans.
Understood.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Krishnamurthy from Illinois.
Shapley, did the FBI first learn of the Delaware computer shop processing a laptop that allegedly belonged to Hunter Biden and contained evidence of potential crimes in October of 2019?
Did the FBI first learn of it?
Yes.
I don't know if I speak about who first learned of it.
Okay. The answer would be yes, but thank you. And isn't it true that the FBI verified the laptop's authenticity in November of 2019 by matching the device number against Hunter Biden's iCloud account?
Yeah, I believe that's in my transcript, and that's accurate.
Correct, transcript 12. The FBI analyzed the computer, correct? There was a report that the transcript 12. The FBI analyzed the computer, correct? There was a report that the FBI CART team analysis had taken place.
Can you point to just a page of my transcript so that
Page 12.
Okay, page 12.
Or transcript 12.
So could you repeat the question, please?
Just isn't it true that the FBI verified the laptop's authenticity in November of 2019 by matching the device number against Hunter Biden's iCloud account?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And they performed an FBI CART team analysis?
Yes, that's yes.
Mr. Ziegler, did you see this report?
I don't think that I talked about that in my transcript.
Correct. I'm assuming that that was probably very frustrating, being that you were conducting an investigation.
So I can speak to this again because I did contemporaneously document a long meeting about the laptop, and Special Agent Ziegler confirmed in that, and it was released in House Ways and Means Committee testimony, that he pointed out individual pieces of data that he was provided, and then he asked why he hadn't seen other pieces of data. And that's when Assistant United States Attorney Wolf told them that prosecutors were withholding information from the investigators.
And I think what's important with withholding, they never said what they were withholding. So I think that is like important.
So to my understanding, the U.S. Attorney said that you haven't seen it because for a variety of reasons, they kept it from the agents. So they kept this information from you. I think it's important to know, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Isn't it relevant evidence for you and your team to review, Mr. Ziegler, that this type of evidence would help you to conduct your investigation?
So in an everyday normal investigation, you would want to know, you're the investigators, we're the ones that are supposed to process the information and provide the relevant information to the prosecutors. So we should know absolutely everything that we're looking at because we might testify to it one day.
So it's safe to say that it's not a normal practice to withhold evidence from agents reviewing a case?
It's not a normal practice to withhold and not tell us what you're withholding from us.
Do you know who made that decision to withhold information from the agents?
That I do not know,
Okay.
and it's not in my transcript.
Okay. Mr. Shapley, you and your team are learning about the existence of this information, and you were being denied information at the same time. And this is October 2020, correct? Time frame?
Yes.
At that same time, did you remember Hunter Biden's laptop being discussed or rather suppressed by the media?
I generally remember the discussion of the laptop. I think everybody heard about the laptop. I don't know if I knew about the media suppressing it.
So I think it's important to note that the FBI learns about the laptop in 2019. That's 2019, not 2020. And in fact, the FBI authenticated the laptop in November of 2019, then takes possession of the laptop, does analysis, but these analyses and information are not provided to you guys, the IRS agents conducting the case. Mind you, the folks running the nuts and bolts of the criminal tax fraud case. They're learning about all this information and yet at the same time being denied access to it. Meanwhile, the media is actively working to suppress that. And at the same time, 51 national security officials sign on to a letter saying that the FBI, of which the FBI has authenticated, saying that it is Russian disinformation. This is, mind you, Joe Biden's son, which I think it's important to note that many of my colleagues try to make this about race and saying that there's a two-tier justice system for black and brown people, and yet we are investigating, according to their terms, a man of white privilege who is being aided and abetted by this administration and being criminally covered for by the Department of Justice, and yet somehow that's not supposed to be a topic of discussion. I have 41 seconds left. Would you guys like to say anything for the record so the American people can know what's really happening in this country?
So I do have something. So there's two things. I believe that AUSA Leslie Wolf and U.S. Attorney David Weiss would say phenomenal things about my work, and I know they have said that. They have said that we did a great job in this investigation. I want to make that clear to everyone, that this isn't, we're not disgruntled, we're not out here to get people. We're here for accountability and that we learn from this. That's the most important part of why we're here.
Well, you are doing great, and I know that you are not conservative. I know you're not a Republican, but I will say this. Thank you for at least bringing faith back to some part of the IRS so that people understand that just because your last name is Biden does not mean that you're held above the law. So thank you. Chairman, I yield my time.
The gentlelady yields back, and that concludes our questions.